Why you don't need friends after 70. 6 reasons to embrace independence and find happiness. At 70 or beyond, you've seen enough of life to know that true contentment doesn't hinge on what someone else thinks of you. It's not about the size of your social circle or the number of people who call you friend. Fulfillment comes from within, from the quiet confidence of knowing who you are and what you've accomplished. Every quote tells a story. Subscribe to Deep Quote Vibes today and unlock the power of reflection, growth, and positivity. As we journey through life, especially as we reach our 70s and beyond, there's a profound shift in how we perceive relationships, self-worth, and the value of time. In youth, we often crave external validation. We want to be liked, admired, and accepted by others. This need for affirmation drives so many of our decisions. The careers we choose, the friendships we nurture, and even the way we present ourselves to the world. But as we grow older, particularly after decades of living, learning, and reflecting, we begin to realize that true contentment doesn't come from the opinions of others. It doesn't depend on how many people call us their friend or how many social events we attend. Instead, fulfillment stems from within, from the quiet confidence of knowing who you are, what you've achieved, and the legacy you've built over the years. By this stage of life, you've already walked a long road. You've built a career, raised a family, or carved out your place in the world. Your legacy, whether it's the love you've given to your children, the impact you've made in your community, or simply the quiet dignity with which you've lived your life, is etched into the fabric of your existence. The opinions of others, which once carried immense weight, no longer hold the same power. You've earned the right to simply be yourself. You don't need a chorus of voices to tell you your worth. You've defined it for yourself over decades of experience. Take Eleanor, for example. At 71, she had spent decades as a devoted schoolteacher, shaping young minds and earning the respect of her peers. For much of her life, Eleanor thrived on being the go-to person, the one everyone could rely on. She hosted holiday dinners, organized community events, and was always the first to offer help when someone needed it. Her calendar was packed, and her home was often filled with laughter and chatter. To the outside world, Eleanor seemed like the epitome of a fulfilled life. But deep down, she carried a quiet ache, a sense that all the effort she poured into maintaining these connections wasn't truly reciprocated. One day, Eleanor decided to take a step back. After retiring, she realized that many of the people she considered close friends were more like acquaintances, people who showed up when it was convenient or when they needed something from her. She remembered the countless times she had reached out, only to be met with silence. The weight of these one-sided relationships began to feel unbearable. So Eleanor made a bold decision. She stopped chasing. She stopped attending events just to be seen, stopped calling people who never called back, and stopped trying to prove her worth to those who didn't value her. Instead, Eleanor turned inward. She rediscovered her love for painting, something she hadn't done since her college days. She started spending her mornings sipping tea on her porch, sketching the birds that visited her garden. She joined a small art class where she met a handful of people who shared her passion. These new connections weren't based on obligation or convenience. They were genuine, built on mutual respect and shared interests. For the first time in years, Eleanor felt a sense of fulfillment that wasn't tied to anyone else's opinion of her. What Eleanor learned, and what many people in their later years come to realize, is that fulfillment isn't about the number of friends you have or the frequency of social invitations. It's about the quality of the relationships you nurture and the peace you find within yourself. True contentment comes from knowing that you've lived a life aligned with your values, that you've contributed meaningfully to the world, and that you've stayed true to who you are. Eleanor often reflects on how different her life feels now compared to a few years ago. She no longer worries about whether people think she's successful, kind, or intelligent. She knows she is all those things, not because someone told her so, but because she's proven it to herself over decades of living authentically. This quiet confidence has become her greatest source of joy. Now, let's delve deeper into why this shift happens and how it transforms the way we live. When you're younger, there's a tendency to equate busyness with success. A packed social calendar, a wide network of acquaintances, and constant engagement with others can feel like proof that you're thriving. But as you age, you begin to see these activities for what they often are: distractions. They keep you occupied, yes, but they don't necessarily bring lasting fulfillment. What you start to crave instead is something deeper, something quieter. You yearn for peace, not just the absence of noise, but a stillness that settles into your bones. This calm allows you to breathe freely, without the weight of social demands pressing down on you. Consider Margaret, a 74-year-old widow whose story illustrates this beautifully. For most of her life, Margaret thrived on a packed social schedule. She had lunch groups, book clubs, and holiday parties with friends from all corners of her life. Her calendar was a rainbow of commitments, each one a little square of connection. But as time wore on, something changed. Those gatherings started to feel less like joy and more like duty. The conversations grew predictable: rehashed stories, petty complaints, gossip about people she barely knew. Some friends leaned on her too hard, unloading their woes without asking how she was doing. Others seemed to call only when they needed something. One afternoon, after yet another draining lunch, it hit her. She wasn't enjoying this anymore. So Margaret made a choice. She stopped saying yes out of guilt. She let herself off the hook from responding to every text or call right away. She began carving out space for herself. Long walks along the river near her house. Afternoons with a cup of tea and a novel she'd been meaning to read. Quiet evenings watching the sunset from her back porch. At first, she worried she'd feel lonely, but she didn't. She felt relieved. The silence wasn't empty. It was rich with possibility. She could think her thoughts, follow her rhythm, without the constant hum of other people's needs. This is the beauty of this age. You're no longer obligated to fill your days with noise just to prove you're still in the game. You don't need a packed schedule to feel alive. You can savor your own company, free from the pressure to perform or entertain. Peace becomes a priority, not because you're retreating from the world, but because you're embracing a different kind of richness. It's the richness of a mind at ease, a heart unburdened by obligation. And the more you lean into it, the more you realize how much you've been craving it all along. If you've ever felt a pang of guilt for skipping a coffee date or turning down an invite, let it go. You're not abandoning life. You're curating it. You're choosing calm over chaos, depth over distraction. Peace isn't just a luxury at this stage. It's a right, and it only gets sweeter with time. Now, let's talk about another important aspect of this stage of life. Fewer friendships mean fewer disappointments. Life has a way of teaching you hard truths, and one of the toughest is this: not every friend is truly a friend. By the time you hit 70, you've likely seen it all. Friends who vanish when times get tough, pals who take more than they give, connections that fade as soon as convenience runs out. It's a bitter pill to swallow, but it's also a clarifying one. Because here's the upside. When you pare down your social circle, you don't just shed obligations. You shed disappointments, too. Fewer friendships mean fewer chances for letdowns, and at this stage, that's a trade worth making. Take William, a 78-year-old who'd weathered his share of fading friendships. He'd known some folks for decades: neighbors, co-workers, golf buddies. But over time, he noticed a pattern. When he stopped initiating contact, the calls stopped coming. People he'd laughed with, confided in, and even helped through tough spots drifted away when he wasn't the one holding the thread. First, it hurt. He'd lie awake wondering what he'd done wrong, why he seemed so easy to forget. But then it clicked: he hadn't changed. They had. Or maybe they'd never been what he thought. Either way, he was tired of carrying the weight of one-sided bonds. So William let go. He stopped chasing people who couldn't be bothered to show up, and you know what? The disappointments stopped, too. No more waiting for calls that never came. No more frustration over empty promises. He turned his focus to what mattered: his kids, his grandkids, and a handful of old friends who'd proven they were in it for the long haul. Better yet, he invested in himself. Mornings tinkering in his garage, afternoons lost in a good book. His world got smaller, but it got richer. That's the secret here. Fewer friendships don't mean isolation. They mean freedom. Freedom from the stress of unmet expectations. Freedom from the emotional clutter of lukewarm connections. You don't need a roster of names to feel whole. You just need the ones who lift you, not drag you down. And if that list is short, so be it. Quality beats quantity every time. Finally, as you approach your later years, you come to understand that time is your most precious currency. When you're young, time often feels infinite, like an endless horizon stretching out before you. There's always another weekend to spend with friends, another evening to linger in casual conversation, another chance to build or mend relationships. You might fritter it away without a second thought, caught up in the whirlwind of social obligations, fleeting romances, or the anxious need to belong. But by the time you reach 70 or beyond, a quiet shift happens in your soul. You start to feel the weight of each passing hour, the significance of every single day, and the fleeting beauty of every moment. Time, you realize, is no longer something to take for granted. It's a finite gift, and how you choose to spend it becomes one of the most important decisions you'll ever make. Friendships, for all their warmth and meaning, demand a certain investment of this precious resource. There are phone calls to make, plans to coordinate, visits to arrange, and emotional energy to expend. In your younger years, you might have poured yourself into these connections willingly, thriving on the laughter, shared stories, and sense of community. But as the years pile up, you begin to see that not all friendships are equal. Some remain vibrant and life-giving, worth every second you give them. Others, though, start to feel like echoes of the past, habits you've carried forward out of nostalgia or duty rather than genuine joy. And at this stage of life, when time feels more finite than ever, you earn the right to pause and reflect. Is this how I want to spend my days? Does this relationship bring me joy? Or is it just a habit carried forward? If you're still reading and resonating with these thoughts, take a moment to reflect. Are you chasing relationships that truly enrich your life? Or are you holding on to connections that drain you? Letting go of what doesn't matter creates space for what does. And that's a gift worth giving yourself. In conclusion, the wisdom of aging lies in recognizing that true contentment doesn't hinge on external validation. It comes from within, from the quiet confidence of knowing who you are and what you've accomplished. Fewer, deeper friendships bring more fulfillment than a large but shallow social circle. Peace becomes more valuable than constant socializing, and time becomes your most precious resource. By embracing these truths, you can curate a life that prioritizes inner peace, meaningful connections, and personal fulfillment. And that, ultimately, is the greatest gift you can give yourself as you navigate the later stages of life.